Hey, hey! Oh, God, that's out of tune, isn't it? Well, welcome back to the NOTCAST, number 342 or thereabouts. Today is Wednesday, the 13th of December, 2023. Now, I was going to start by singing, hey, hey, it's the NOTCAST, and people say I'm full of shit. But this is out of tune, which I realised as I started playing it, and I also realised I don't know the chords to Hey Hey with the Monkeys. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, today I am going to talk about gatekeeping in fandoms. Really careful to put the guitar down properly. I ain't going to do a Pete Townsend on it. So if you're new or old, and you've seen a few of these before, you'll know that about 2 months ago, I did a video telling people don't buy Roger Waters' Dark Side of the Moon CD, which got more hits than anything else I've ever done, and quite a lot of naughty comments from rude people. So today I've been thinking about that and some of the stuff that's in the news. I'm going to talk about gatekeeping in fandoms and about criticism and perspectives upon that and opinions. So first and foremost, I think we go to the news today. So today, Gary Lineker, who is if you don't know, and you don't live in the UK, by the way, some of this may not mean a huge amount to you. There is a football commentator called Gary Lineker who comes from Leicester. I used to buy food from the food stall that his family used to have in Leicester Market, actually, when I lived in Leicester back in the 90s. I am old, or as I prefer to think of it, experienced. Gary Lineker is one of Britain's former greatest football players and now a football commentator who has a Twitter account, and he is on BBC commentating about football and various other things. And he on Twitter sometimes he'll post up political comments. He signed a letter in regards to, I think, the current British government's plan to export refugees to Rwanda, saying this was a very bad idea and they probably shouldn't do it. Because he works for the BBC, he is, or more correctly, he's a contractor to the BBC. BBC employees are, according to what I've read in the Charter, must not endorse or attack a political party. They can't criticise individual politicians or officially campaign on the behalf of any political party or campaign. Fairly bland, you must think, right? But what it doesn't mean is that people who work for the BBC aren't allowed to have opinions. And the BBC's potential next chief exec, Samir Shah, who is the Culture Secretary's preferred candidate, has taken the view that Gary Lineker is currently breaching the rules by posting up tweets that criticise current government policy. Grant Shapps, an MP who has traded under many names and in some ways not necessarily particularly well, let's see if this chair goes up a little bit, has said Gary Lineker should stop meddling in other areas and just focusing on football would be better for him. As an MP called, I think, Jonathan Gullis, who said yet another breach of BBC guidelines. And that made me think about gatekeeping. It made me think about criticism. It made me think about my experiences reviewing a not very good Roger Waters album and my perspective upon that. So there's a really interesting thing around criticism where if you criticise something, there's a couple of stock responses that come out. The first one is the standard, stay in your lane. So stick to the things you know about. If you're a professional in a subject area, that's the only thing you can have a public opinion on. So Gary Lineker is only allowed to have opinions on football. Noel Gallagher is obviously only allowed to have opinions about music. Richard Osman is only allowed to have an opinion about murder novels or game shows, for example. It's a very reductionist way of looking at the world, and also completely hypocritical, because staying in your lane is a way of closing off unacceptable discourse. And by unacceptable, I mean criticism that hurts other people's feelings. And when that happens, you have to go touch the emotional support cat and show me where the bad man said the bad thing that hurt you. Normally, it's here. By the way, this is a fluffy cat called Mog. I also have 3 actual cats, 4 including this one. The stay in your lane criticism is one of the main tenets of gatekeeping. So, for example, one of the comments on the Roger Waters episode, which I did, was very clearly said, "Why is that? Do you think you could do better? Case closed." Well, in those circumstances, people are putting false equivalencies forward. So it's saying only people that are really great at guitar solos can criticise guitar solos. Only people that are actual professional politicians are allowed to criticise other politicians. Only people that can play football to professional standards are allowed to criticise or talk about football teams and whether a particular player or manager is good or not. And when you put it in those contexts, you suddenly realise that if you come forward with the answer of saying, well, you can't do better, so you're not allowed to have an opinion, you immediately rule out and invalidate all football banter ever. You immediately rule out any discussions about who is the better guitarist in Suede, whether Pink Floyd got worse after Roger left or when David Gilmour joined versus Syd Barrett, and who is the best bass player in Metallica, for example. You're not allowed to have opinions about any of that unless you're either a professional bass player or a member of Pink Floyd. And that's bullshit, because we're all allowed to have opinions and ideas about absolutely everything. And that includes things that we're not professionals at. Most of us are only professionals at one thing. So I'm a professional at something to do with finance. I have opinions about things that aren't related to finance, and we're all allowed to express them. The second part of that is when you're not allowed to have opinions upon anything you're not a professional expert level at, it immediately dramatically shrinks the cultural discourse. I have, for my sins, spent a little bit of time on the Steve Hoffman forums, and there's a lot of what is very clearly ageist, sexist commentary around Taylor Swift, who has become nominated as Times Person of the Year, for people going, oh, all she is like she sells sex and she makes bad music. And it's like, she does a huge amount of stuff that's about donating to charities, encouraging voter registration, paying her people that work in her organisation well and rewarding them for that. You know, irrespective of the music, which doesn't do a huge amount for me, those are really good examples to set in terms of how you conduct your activity to be, you know, good corporate actors or behaving in an ethical way. And yet all they're saying is, oh, she wore like a swimsuit in a video once and she must be like a bimbo. It's like, no, you're just an old man. Now, I'm old, I know that. And I know that Taylor Swift's music isn't really for me. That's okay too. I'm not the target audience for it. Me criticising her music, which I don't do, is not because I don't like it. It doesn't work for me. But I can tell she's really good at what she does. In the same way that I can tell that Yngwie Malmsteen is probably an amazing guitarist, but I don't like his music at all. And unless I can like Yngwie Malmsteen, am I allowed to have an opinion? No. And of course, neither are you. Except, of course, we all are. And I think it's an unfair restriction upon free speech to say to Gary Lineker, you aren't allowed to have opinions about anything. And we all have opinions about things. And if you have a moment where you look at the hell site that is Twitter, you realise that not only do lots of people have opinions, lots of people have terrible opinions, and they're very keen on letting you know all about it, including, depending on who you talk to, me. The second part of that is that one of the things about cultural discourse is that we need to have a diversity of opinion, not just a diversity of backgrounds, but a diversity of thought, because otherwise you start to become very stagnant. And as I've mentioned previously, sometimes there are some artists who surround themselves with yes men, and so the only ideas that ever come to fruition are the ones that come from the person that's paying the piper. And then you end up to the point where you start to have a minimal kind of diversification of ideas. You don't have anybody that sits there and goes, I'm not sure that's a good idea, because if somebody does that, they're probably fired. Now, looking at another respect about that, some of the comments that I had on the YouTube video, particularly the ones where I said, don't buy Roger Waters' Dark Side of the Moon, it's not very good, were comments about my appearance. And frankly, come on guys, really? If that's what you're going to do, play the ball and not the man is the first part of it. The second one is, if you're judging by appearances, well, firstly, I've seen Michael Fabricant's hair, and if you haven't, Google it. I suspect it comes out of a box, and it's not great. And so me being bald is one, not an insult, and two, not exactly news to me. And no, also saying that I've got glasses, I'm like, really? I hadn't noticed. Thanks, guys. Sorry, sarcasm there, the lowest form of wit. You may have heard of it. It may still be above some of you. So, Roger Waters' Dark Side of the Moon review got lots of unpleasant comments, which were all eaten by the spam filter. So if you're putting nasty comments into YouTube, and by the way, everyone can see what you're doing on that, remember that the algorithm will eat it, and I will only see it when I'm curious to see what absolute monstrosity of stupidity people are coming up with. And some of it, I'm like sat there going, wow, that's your best insult? Oh God, I need to take you to Insults Academy. But secondly, also going, you wasted time typing that into a box to tell me what you thought of me. Okay. Yeah. Guys, Roger Waters doesn't need anybody fighting his side for him. He's big enough, ugly enough and rich enough to not give a shit about the opinions of the vast majority of people in the world. And that's quite all right with me. I have an opinion, he has an opinion. His opinion is, this is probably quite good. My opinion, it isn't. So what, guys? No big deal. Other opinions are available. The second thing around that is where people are commenting upon hair or weight or age or gender or whether you've got glasses or not. And it's like, right, so only people with a full head of hair that don't have glasses are allowed to comment on Roger Waters? Okay, that's not quite how the real world works. Secondly, only people that are bass players who are grumpy are allowed to have comments or ideas or opinions about Dark Side of the Moon. Again, that's not how the real world works, guys. Wake up and smell the cappuccino. The second one is around the line, haters gonna hate. Now, this is a very stupid thing to say, haters gonna hate, because again, it's very reductionist and it implies all criticism is down to some kind of blind, irrational hatred. Do you know, sometimes criticism comes from a place of wanting to like something and being disappointed by it. And if any of you have seen The Rise of Skywalker, or for that matter, the third Matrix film, you will know that haters don't hate. Haters often come from a place of love and they want to be wowed and overjoyed and amazed and stunned by how brilliant something is, and then have that sense of disappointment going, how did this get made? That's a great podcast had it, or this could have been better, this could have been different. You know, if you listen to a podcast like Sequelizers, who I really, really enjoy, hi guys, you're not watching, which is three guys talking about bad movie sequels and how you can do them better. That's not hating on a film. It's talking about this is what we wanted and this isn't what we had. And this is how we think it might have been better. So the idea that haters going to hate people that blindly and irrationally hate stuff because, what, hate is exhausting. If you've ever hated anybody, like an ex, for example, it's exhausting and it takes up a lot of bandwidth in your brain, it takes up a lot of energy, a lot of time. And frankly, you know, living well is the best revenge, as REM said it. So haters gonna hate is a nonsensical statement that automatically rules out any criticism as invalid because it's criticism and doesn't necessarily see that actually there's some validity to some of that. The idea that can you do better? Well, frankly, I'm better at my job than Roger Waters could be, and I'm better at my job than lots of people could be. I'm also not as good as a bass player or a guitarist as Roger Waters is, and that's fine. Everyone has a unique skill set and we have to play to that. The other thing that we do have is this idea around speaking truth to power. Now that's a strange concept. In comedy it's called punching up. The idea is that you as an individual are allowed to have criticism of something, and that's part of the contextual dialogue that we have. You know, if suddenly we find that a band's lineup has changed completely and they make an album that's utterly unrepresentative of everything that they've done previously, people are allowed to go, I don't think that's very good. And that's part of the process of being a fan, is to pass your thoughts, observations and ideas around certain things. I have seen some terrible movies, and not terrible in the sense of Jaws 4, which bought a wonderful house, although the film is terrible, but terrible as in absolutely incompetent, incomprehensibly bad movies. I often have a soft spot for them because they're so bad, they go round from good to bad again. But I've seen Troll 2, you know, for example. I've seen The Toxic Avenger. I've seen, I've seen My Cousin Vinny, which is one of the worst films I've ever seen. I've seen Battlefield Earth. it brings me no joy to watch them and go, they're awful. You know, I was sat there going, I was hoping I was going to watch a film that was quite good, and then you find out that you're not. And if you follow this line about gatekeeping of criticism, telling people stay in your lane, don't be uppity, what you're doing is you're reducing the cultural discourse to merely bland and boosterish client journalism. So talking about client journalism is something that's actually been responsible for a lot of the political issues that have happened in the UK. I'm going to get slightly political for a minute, and I suspect if you're not in the UK, you'll hear similar things about this. So when you have snake oil salesmen and grifters that become politicians, people that talk a talk but have no substance and have no delivery that backs that up. Specifically, I'm thinking Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson, Donald Trump. Now, whether you lean that way or not politically, these people are not competent politicians. They are not good at delivering. They don't have a grasp of detail. They don't have the skill set that's necessary to be capable and competent at the work in which they do. Much as I will regret saying this, and I frequently do, if I'm going to be led by a government I disagree with, at least let them be competent. So for their sins, Margaret Thatcher was competent, even though I didn't agree with any of her policies. John Major was competent. I didn't agree with any of his policies. Then we had David Cameron, who was basically an insurance salesman who didn't grasp detail. We had, who was it after that? Theresa May. Okay, but a bit of a personality vacuum. More competent than Cameron, not particularly good. Boris Johnson, who, well, frankly, if you vote for a clown, you deserve a circus. Liz Truss, who was in post for less time than Buckethead was in Guns N' Roses. And then we have Rishi Sunak, neither of whom are particularly good or competent at what they do. That was what you need is a certain skill set to execute a certain role. And if you don't have that skill set, you're allowed to criticise it. You're allowed to have opinions about things. It doesn't mean that you're not allowed to have an opinion. Because, for example, if you don't play bass, you're allowed to criticise Dark Side of the Moon? Well, depending on who you ask, if I'm being critical of Dark Side of the Moon, of course I'm not, because I don't know what I'm talking about, and I couldn't do any better. But on the other hand, if I'm saying nice things about it, no one's going to have a problem with it, are they? But the problem with that is they say if you have criticism that's negative around something and you don't like it, then you want it to be stopped, or you attack the person that's criticising something, you're kind of going, who's the snowflake now? Strange question. Not sure necessarily there's an answer to that. And the other thing I did mention is I mentioned the word uppity, which, by the way, started being used in America in about 1870. Slavery was abolished in 1865. The use of the word uppity has a dodgy historical background. It was first used by people that used to own slaves to describe the people that were no longer slaves because they were chatting back. They didn't know their station and their place, and they hadn't stayed in their lane by getting ambitions such as wanting to be treated with dignity and respect and not to be slaves. So uppity is a dodgy word, by the way. So when somebody calls you uppity, remember that's the power dynamic they're trying to invoke there. They may not necessarily even realise it, but that is what they're doing. The second thing around criticism is sometimes you have to, there's a phrase which is used in journalism, speak truth to power. So you have to be able to criticise things. You have to be able to say, I don't think this is a good idea because of X, Y, and Z. If you don't have that, you then have double plus on goods, double speak, well, groupthink, and you end up like being in 1984, which is, by the way, a terrifying film that I rate highly. But you get to the point where the language is reduced, so the concepts are reduced. So you then can't do things like criticism. You can't say, I don't like the idea of something, and then you go, I wish there was a Japanese word for the unread pile of books in your house or something, or the or that type of stuff, or the French word for having thought, I think I've experienced this before, for example. Those are the type of things where you get to the point where language is reduced to the point where it becomes incomprehensible. You start to have what I call an idiotification of reality, where you remove concepts and ideas from the discourse. Gatekeeping is poisonous in terms of criticism. Everyone is allowed to have an opinion, and you have to put limits on that, but you don't have to put many limits on it. One of the limits you have to put on it is the tolerance paradox, which is a philosophical theory around tolerating everything apart from intolerant behaviour. So, for example, it's quite all right for me to say, I don't think Roger Waters' Dark Side of the Moon is very good. It's not all right for me to say you should kill, burn and, I don't know, murder people that are X or Y, because that's where you start to be infringing upon other people's right to exist peacefully and quietly. Except, of course, I'm the snowflake, because that's what I think. The other thing around gatekeeping is that gatekeeping is meant to reduce criticism. It's meant to put artificial barriers of entry onto fandoms. So there are fandoms that I'm part of, bands that I like that have been going for a long period of time. Some people think if you saw them with the first guitarist, you're a better human being. No, you really, it's just a victim of geography and time. Some people think you're not really a fan of the band unless you've seen them 38 times. Like, some people only get to see a band once in their lives. Some people, for example, I think The Cure played their first show in Uruguay last month. Like, what happens if you're in a situation where you can't afford to leave Uruguay? What happens if you're in a situation where the band never play where you come from? What happens if you're in Italy and you like the Wonder Stuff and they've never played Italy? Well, maybe they have. What happens if you're in Australia and Depeche Mode last played there in 1990 when one of them was alive and one of them was still a member of the band? They were a four-piece. Nirvana hadn't even released Nevermind, and the internet hadn't even had its first web page up. Does that mean you're less of a fan because you won't fly from Melbourne to go and see Depeche Mode anywhere else in the world? No, it doesn't. We have these circumstances that are put upon us, and that's where gatekeeping comes in. Is it tries to reduce and snobberize, that's a word, the discourse, to say, you can only have an opinion about something if you've done it, if you're experiencing it, if you're a practitioner in it. So I wouldn't dream of giving you guitar lessons because I'm very bad at guitar. I'm learning. I'm less bad than I was a few months ago. On the flip side of that is every opinion is valid. The fact I can't play guitar doesn't mean that my opinions about a guitar player are valid or invalid. Absolutely not. And I have opinions about various guitar players in various bands, some better than others and some better fits than others. Doesn't mean that I can't have the opinion because I can't play guitar. Does it mean that you're not allowed to have opinions about football matches, managers, teams, players? Of course not. But under the gatekeeping element, unless you're a pro at football, stay in your lane, know your place, peon, which is a bizarre way of looking at it. And we have, other things around public discourse where people go, why are you saying this now? So I'm going to talk very briefly about the recent allegations against Russell Brand. People are saying, well, why didn't she say something sooner? Firstly, if you are publicly identified as, for example, having been sexually assaulted by somebody who's famous, you become a target. Okay, newspapers can do bad things to you. So, for example, and it's all fully detailed in this book, Dial M for Murdoch, which is a horrific read. There was a point where, and I believe it's detailed in here, where the newspaper gave a mobile phone to the mother of a missing child, and then they hacked into the voicemail of that missing child and deleted messages so they could hear new messages that were being left for the child by distraught friends, relatives and parents. And the police then thought the child is alive because somebody is accessing their mobile phone, which wasn't the case. So perverting the course of justice. If if that's what they're going to do to a missing child, do you really think newspapers are going to have any qualms whatsoever about monstering somebody that's made an allegation about a rich, famous person with access to powerful lawyers who may have been sexually assaulted by that person? So when people said, and this, I'm not passing judgment on whether Russell Brand did or didn't do it. That's not the point of this. I'm just talking about that's the most recent of the publicly available allegations around major famous people. Is if you, let's say your name is Joanne Bloggs, for example. If there is a Joanne Bloggs, obviously this won't apply to you. If you're Joanne Bloggs and you say, right, so Russell Brand did this thing to me, and people are going, she's only saying it now for money and attention. You do not want that kind of attention. It's not pleasant at all. And if people say, right, so you're doing it for money, it's like, some people have got no money. What they're trying to do is to warn other people about the behaviours of people that they've met. So If you're old, great, congratulations. All you've done is not die. But if you're old, you'll remember going out when you were younger. If you're younger than me, you might go, as a guy who go, don't go out with him, he's a wrong un, right? That's the kind of thing, it's the network that happens. And I don't think I'm speaking out of tune when I'm saying that there's probably a network of discussion amongst people where they go, that guy's a wrong un, or don't go out with that person, they do X, Y, and Z, and an informal kind of warning around what's happening. If you're famous, rich, and a bit dodgy, you can probably get away with that because no one's going to sit there. The people that you go, right, don't be in a room alone with him. But at the same point, there's always going to be more people that they're going to meet that aren't going to know that. They're going to be in a room alone with him. They're suddenly going to find out, oh, that's bad. Harvey Weinstein, long established and convicted criminal who performed a number of very unpleasant things towards women. He was the kind of person where somebody would go, don't be in a room alone with him because something's going to happen. And you can't tweet that. By the way, it's tweet, not X, because X or Zeet is not a verb. Tweet is a verb. On Twitter, you can't go, oh, don't be in a room alone with person X, because firstly, you could get sued, and secondly, it could be wrong, but you'd have an informal, like, don't be in a room alone with X kind of conversation. The other side of that is around things called slaps, which you may or may not have heard about. UK's libel law is the tightest libel law in the world. And SLAP is a strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's meant to shock and awe and silence people who have opinions that the people that submit the SLAPs don't want to have or don't want you to know about them. So SLAPs, for example, will come where there's potentially, and it normally happens with a lot of pre-action letters from lawyers that are meant to intimidate and scare you. Now, there's a thing called a war of attrition. A war of attrition is about who has the most muscle. In capitalist terms, yay, capitalism, the most muscle is obviously money. So people that submit slaps are often using financial abuse by saying, we're richer than you, we're more powerful than you, we can set our lawyers on you, we will silence you. Even if what you're saying is true and verifiable and backed up with evidence, we can bankrupt you. We can take your home away from you, we can make you homeless, we can destroy your life, and we can make you a target. Slaps are designed to place what's called a chilling effect on public discourse. I don't think they should be used. There's also NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, which are legal agreements between two parties so that one party won't say anything negative, even if it's true, about another party in exchange for some money. Silence is effectively being bought with NDAs. London is dripping in NDAs. There are thousands of them out there. I can't tell you who has or hasn't got one. I can't tell you who has and hasn't signed one. What I can tell you is that I know for a fact that there are organisations that have broken the law, broken their own policies and procedures, gone against case law, and they have bought the silence of the people that they have mistreated in exchange for not damaging that company's reputation by speaking the truth and facts about them. Not a controversial thing to say that. I'm pretty sure in any office that you're working with, at least one person has signed an NDA about a former employer. And who knows, could be you. London is dripping in NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, and they do exactly the same thing, except instead of threatening to make you homeless, they pay you money to leave the company and not take them to court for various things that have happened or to ruin their reputation publicly. These are all over the place. They're everywhere. And that is how we have gatekeeping in terms of knowledge. There are huge chunks of things which, were they known publicly, would undoubtedly cause lots of reputational damage to lots of organisations and lots of people you've heard of and lots of people you've never heard of. Gatekeeping is the same type of thing. It's around trying to control the narrative, to remove anything that could be seen as criticism, often which is completely justifiable, of anything. And when I was quite surprised actually by how vociferous and unpleasant some of the comments were on the YouTube, but again I was like, Nobody will ever see it. The algorithm will eat it. And you've just wasted all your time writing that. That's not a good use of time. And the second part about that is you have to think about the audience that you're going to have. There's an uneven kind of, there's an inequality between the two parties. Say, for example, the Radiohead song, Punch Up at a Wedding, on the album Hail to the Thief, 2003 album. Can't believe that's 20 years old already. The track Punch Up at a Wedding was inspired by a review of Radiohead. And then Tom was going, well, I'm going to write the lyrics because it felt so unfair that this person was saying these things about this show, one of the Radiohead shows, and I had no recourse. And from my perspective, I'm like, this album sold 2 million copies. You played the song in arenas and stadiums. To say that you have no recourse is palpably, utterly fucking nonsense, frankly. And so be it, you know. But to think that they somehow didn't have any opportunity to do recourse around a review that they didn't like. You know, as soon as you do anything, somebody somewhere is going to have an opinion about it. You know, I know there are people that don't like me. That's okay. Sometimes they're the people I don't like. And that's okay too, because there are people I don't like. There's people you don't like. And if you don't like me, what the hell are you doing watching this? Go and watch another YouTuber that you prefer. But with gatekeeping, it's around building this artificial imposition of barriers around sensible conversation to go, well, actually, you know, fandom comes from a place of love. It always does. But also, fandom can hold the bands or the acts or the artists or the movies to a higher standard than generic anything else. So, for example, fans of a certain band, The Cure, yeah, I'm going there, have opinions about the band's drummer. Because they think that the other drummer that isn't in the band anymore was better. And it's like, well, okay, you're entitled to your opinion. I think Jason's a really good drummer. I play drums. So, hey, if you're going to talk about that, I know what the fuck I'm talking about. If that's the attitude you're going to take. But the second thing is, it doesn't really matter, does it? At the end of the day, it doesn't. Because sometimes art isn't made for us. It's made for the people that are making it. It's made for the moment and the expression and communication of an idea. Certain parts of certain fandoms have the opinion that if you prefer, let's say, Stephen Drozd in The Flaming Lips to Ronald Jones, then clearly you're a moron. It's like, that's not the case. On the other hand, if you prefer, a certain singer in a certain band compared to the second singer in the other band, who clearly got a much wider range, then you kind of go, not sure about that. The thing about gatekeeping is that we need to be open to a wide variety of ideas and thoughts that we can discuss. If we don't, the world becomes very small. The world becomes very one-dimensional. And we have an element of groupthink, an element of only, one food, one band, one set of films. And that's a really difficult position to be in. It becomes a very kind of black and white, monotone version of reality. So that's gatekeeping. And I wasn't quite sure where I was going to go with this, and I wasn't quite sure how it was going to go, and I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do or what I was going to say. And here I am. So there you are. Now, if you're going to say, I can't criticise Dark Side of the Moon because I couldn't have done better, well, guess what? Unless you're a YouTuber, you're not allowed to have an opinion. And you're not allowed to have an opinion about football unless you're a professional footballer. And you're not allowed to have an opinion about politics unless you're an elected MP in the Houses of Parliament. Otherwise, shut the hell up, stay in your lane and know your place. Of course, I don't believe that. I think that the diversity of people and opinions is what makes this world beautiful. Sometimes really annoying, but also beautiful. And it's really important to be open to new experiences. You never know when you're going to hear your new favourite band, watch your new favourite film, or read your new favourite book. So, although I have told you not to listen to Dark Side of the Moon and not to buy it, it's entirely up to you if you do, and if you love it, that's absolutely great. And if you don't, that's great too. There's lots of other great records that came out this year. But if you're going to go and call people names because of their appearance or the fact you don't like them, then play the ball and not the man. Because when you're playing the man, i.e. me, or the criticism, or let's say Roger Ebert, for example, you're reducing yourself. People are going, well, actually, you've got nothing to play against this particular person or work of art. And Margaret Thatcher said that I very rarely agree with her, although I do think she was competent at what she did. Said when they start to get personal, it means they're losing. So that's my thoughts on gatekeeping. That's my thoughts on, well, loads of things, most of which you never asked about. I'm not going to do one of these for the next few days, because the next few days I am busy and I'm going to go and see rock bands in London play music with guitars. And hopefully it's going to be absolutely splendid. And I will catch up with you sometime next week. Just remember, what is in room 101 is your very worst fears. And for me, it's probably a Red Hot Chili Peppers concert. We are the dead. Okay, bye.